welcome everyone for joining us today for our free webinar, Change That Lasts. We know that everyone is busy, so we appreciate you carving out an hour of your time to spend it with us so that we can dig into this meaty topic. Feels very relevant, and we get lots of questions about this, so we're excited to dig in. If you did submit a question through the form when you registered, we will try and address that in the session. But if along the way, if you have a question, please throw it in the Q&A and we will monitor those and try and get to it as we go through. For anyone who is new to Slingshot 25, let me just take a minute just to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. Slingshot 25 is a business consulting company, and we help companies create programs and solutions in the areas of leadership development and change management. And our presenters today, Jackie Pelland and Courtney Smock, each spent about 25 years in the corporate world working for big, complex matrix organizations doing this work. And part of the reason they started Slingshot 25 is because they wanted to help other companies solve some of their messiest business problems, those that involve people, right? And we really pride ourselves on helping our clients and giving them practical tools and simple tools that they can start using right away. But we also challenge leaders to think differently about how they lead and what that means, from their responsibilities to their behaviors. And so that's a little bit unique in terms of our approach and our style. When it comes to our products and services, they can really be categorized into these three buckets. We provide change management training and communication support, team performance workshops and training, leadership training and coaching. And after years of creating these solutions in the corporate world, everything from leading change in the biggest acquisition in aerospace and defense to building clean sheet performance management programs for organizations with 70,000 employees, Jackie and Courtney have really done it all. They've been in the trenches, they've been where you are, and they've done the work. It's also part of the reason why our products and services are customized. We know that every single team, every single business is different. Even within the same company, no two teams are the same. And so we really pride ourselves on working closely with our clients to figure out what do they need and how can we best help them get the results that they're looking for. The other thing to know about Jackie and Courtney is that they are both IPEC certified coaches. So that gives them a little bit different perspective and approach, and that is ingrained into everything that we do. So that's a little bit about our products and services. If you do not follow us online or on social media, please do so. We post free articles, videos, podcasts, information about free events like this webinar on social media almost daily. It's also on our website on slingshot25.com. I encourage you to go check it out if you haven't done so already. Jackie has her own video series called Jack Chat, Tiny Lessons in Leadership Straight Up. And Jackie and Courtney have their own podcast, which we like to call the Shotcast. Bite-sized podcasts that are really focused on relevant topics on change and leadership. And we also try and inject a little bit of humor and a little levity into those resources too. So
we think we're funny.
We think we're funny. So please go online, check it out. Again, these are free, and we encourage you to use them in your team meetings or share them with your colleagues and let us know how it goes. So if you haven't done so already, check it out. And with that intro, I think I'm going to hand it over to Courtney Smock.
A change that lasts. So we have been waiting, I didn't realize, like 5 years to tell this story. So we started Slingshot 25 in 2020. We've been doing corporate change for the better part of 20 years, like Kim Garrett said. And just recently, I don't know, learning is an interesting thing. You never stop doing it. And we've spent some time saying, what? Even though we've been doing this work a long time, we kind of do the same things all the time. And there's some consistent things that happen when you do complex work and it sticks. And so this talk is really sharing with you what those elements are and what we call change that lasts. So if you want to go to the next slide, it's kind of fun first to say, well, if you want to make it stick, what makes it not stick? What are the pitfalls? How come we announce these changes, we have a desired impact, and then it doesn't really happen? Sometimes we care, sometimes we don't. And there are just things that we've seen repeatedly get in the way. They just somewhere between where you thought you were going and actually getting there, you run into sometimes you run into a buzzsaw, sometimes you just run into a bump. And these are some of the pitfalls, right? There is it's like a lack of decision clarity. And I'm just gonna like say that slow and pause for you all for a moment. Like think about a big change that's going on that you're anticipating, maybe one you're in the middle of, or maybe one that you just supposedly went through. And think about the impact that decision making and decision communication had on the entire process. Like there, it is very difficult to, and I don't know why, I don't think it's difficult. It just gets skipped all the time. That we are very clear when we made a decision. We are super dedicated, committed, responsible to communicate that decision. And we communicate that decision. We explain to people what that decision is going to mean for them. Like we understand the impacts of it. And we're just super clear about setting expectations from that point, super clear about painting a picture where we're going. A lot of times, think about it, we haven't even decided anything. And you're already setting your change up for failure because you let a rumor get out, or people have misinterpretations, or four different groups have four different beliefs about where we're headed and they're not syncing up. And it kind of leads into the second pitfall, which is a lack of agreement at the leadership team level. It is really, really hard to implement a change across your organization if the people who have ownership and accountability for it don't agree on where you're headed. And they pretend like they do. People sit in the meetings at some level, the words seem to work. But when we leave the meeting and turn around and talk to our people, we're saying it slightly differently, or we're saying the timing's different, or I don't agree about the importance of it. I'm going to get to it later, and this other person's working as a priority. And so this misalignment at the leadership team level actually becomes a huge pitfall because the employees in the organization don't actually know what they're supposed to do. They don't actually know if they can trust where we're going. They don't actually know how to work together when one department thinks that we're aligned one way and their department is aligned to something else. And so at some level, there's a story that says we're changing this, but everywhere I look, I see different versions of where we're going. And it's because not because of what people are trying to do on the ground, but what our leaders are saying and doing. And most of the time, I don't think it's intentional. I don't think like people are in there like duking it out. It's just we didn't get underneath it. We didn't ask more questions. We didn't validate our assumptions. We didn't test different scenarios to say, hey, when I think about this, what are you thinking? Another one is the change feels too big. And so people get overwhelmed and they check out and we stop before we even start. So it is important when we're setting goals and we're setting up changes and we're giving direction. If any of you have done goal training in the back, and at any point in your life, like one of the things a goal has to be is attainable. And so when we set up big strategic initiatives or we pick goals that are like, it could be a small goal, but it's like a big change. If it's not attainable and we don't provide a path for people to break it down and know where to start and get going, they will just sort of freeze out and not do anything. And that's a self-preservation, that's an intelligent response. I don't want to fail. And so I'd rather wait a little longer, do a little more research, kind of hang out on the edges before I get going because I just don't, I use that phrase all the time, how to eat an elephant. I've never actually eaten an elephant or anything close to it, but we say it all the time, how do you do it one bite at a time? It's very true. And when we fail to sort of break things down and help people get started and not freak out our ego sometimes, Um, Nobody says, "Hey, I'm not going to work on that," but everybody says, and actually, they don't work on it because it's too big, it's too much. They don't know where to start, and they're not going to fail. And then the last one, I think, looking for a quick fix, the actual work of sticking through change that lasts, it is rarely, never a quick fix. And the word journey like grosses everyone out who wants to say, oh, it's a journey. It's a journey. It's a journey. It is a journey, but the word sucks and weasel worded, as Jackie would say. But easy doesn't do it most of the time. It should be ease. I just had a coaching conversation. We talked about the difference between ease and easy. Like it should make sense what you're doing. There should be buy-in to where you're going, but it's not going to be easy, right? You're going to have to chop the wood and clean yourself up and get things straight. You're going to have to stay committed, right? You're going to have to make decisions and you're going to have to encourage people. And there's just not an easy button for change that lasts because you're taking human beings from where they are today to somewhere else and they don't go gently. So that's the pitfalls. I think I want to, do I want to say one more thing or am I gonna give this to Jackie? I can't remember. Like my notes don't make sense. Yeah, I'm gonna switch it to Jackie so we can talk about a little bit more about overthinking and underthinking and how this contributes to what is really needed to make change that lasts.
Okay, then. I can't believe that you can't read your notes, Courtney. Stunning. That's stunning to me.
My notes are for the next section. We
Oh,
must.
okay. So thank you, Courtney. And I'm guessing that you can relate to a lot of what Courtney is talking about. I know you can because I actually just spent a few minutes this morning, once again, reading through all of the comments that you submitted when you signed up to join us today. And one of the things that I noted, and that's a theme, will come as no surprise to you. There was other things you said, but one of the most prevalent themes that I saw in there was, oh, the biggest struggle you have with managing change is getting people to accept it, to buy in. Let's see, I saw the words, I wrote them down here. To onboard to the change, to accept the change, buy in, embrace, adopt, all of these things that are about how do we get people to actually do the thing that we're introducing. You know, all changes, of course, are introduced because somebody wants something to get better. It does. I mean, as we all know, we've lived through some changes that on the other end of it, it's like, oh, this is not better. But initially, that's, of course, what everybody wants. And so we want things to be better, to improve. And in order to do that, we need people to buy in, to accept, to adopt, to embrace all of those things that you said you're struggling with. And so that leads me into I guess this point that we want to make here about we have to shift our thinking about change. We're about to show you, and you'll see in the next slide, we are indeed going to talk about a process, like a way to move through change. But before we take you there, if any of you have ever been in a classroom with us or have known us long enough, you know, and Kim Garrett mentioned it at the front end of this conversation when she shared a little bit more about us, is one of the first things that we're going to talk to you, though, is about how do you think about what you're going to do? Like when it comes to messy human beings, no process, tool, or system is going to fully save you. Process tools and systems can be helpful, but if you use those process tools and systems without addressing how you think about the work that you're doing, you will probably end up with some frustration and some mediocrity where you could have really excelled. And so I just want to say a few things about the shift that we need you to be mindful of, to start noticing, to commit to play around with, experiment with, as we like to say, that's related to moving change through your organization. And we classify these as like, sometimes we overthink it and sometimes we underthink it, meaning we don't get it just right. So let me just say a couple things about each one of these, and hopefully some of this resonates with you. And my purpose in describing these to you is not to shame you into like, oh my gosh, I'm an overthinker or I'm an underthinker. It's instead to invite you to notice Maybe notice some of the ways you think about change initiatives that you are a part of or instrumental in, or maybe even the recipient of. So let me start with actually underthinking, even though it's listed second. Underthinking. This is, classically this will be easy. It's a simple change. This is a simple change. And you immediately sort of jump into this thinking about, I'm just imagining the memo now. I'm just imagining the email or the poster or the messages I'm going to send. And you spend a lot of time thinking kind of instrumentally, if you will, about the change of just, we're going to just follow these steps, send this information out. It's a kind of a classic underthinking. It oftentimes also shows up in oh, this is easy for me. Like, this is no big deal to me. And we get in this, if this isn't a problem for me, then it's not a problem. And I don't think I'm being too critical when I say that tends to happen the higher you are in the organization. It's not a problem for me, so it's not a problem. And you forget because it's easy to forget. Again, this is all in, this cognitive stuff here is you have a lot of information already about the change, so it might not feel like much of a problem for you, or you actually aren't going to be moved that much or disturbed or impacted that much by the change. And so if it's not a problem for me, it's not a problem. And we go into kind of a classic underthinking approach. When, of course, what we really need to be doing is blending what is the change with how it's going to be received. So we're going to, get very quickly here into impact, thinking about the other person. The metaphor that came to me the other day was like, if the change is yellow and the organization is blue, then thinking about the change needs to be green in your thinking, right? Combining both, like, what is the change and what's the impact going to be, and find your space sort of in that middle of understanding what's, sort of the instrument of what's coming at us versus how it's going to be perceived. This is, of course, where we're trying to get you, but you can also overthink it, which is this idea of, rather than overthinking, I think I'd rather call this like over-controlling for every aspect of what is going to happen, thinking that if I just control it, all of that sort of green stuff, where the yellow change meets the blue workforce, that I'm going to be able to control all of what happens in that green space. That sounds weird to call it a green space. You get the idea though. This is the idea of lots of mass communication, lots of training where we're checking people off, and lots of return receipt, all of that, just trying to control for all of the messy. So we set ourselves up. I think you're starting to see, and I know you're experiencing, I can tell from your comments that this is hard to get right. It's a classic, what we call Goldilocks problem, right? Of, too hot, too cold. We're trying to get to just right. Classic Goldilocks problem. So what we want to do is to invite you to think a little bit differently, invite you to consider, in this classic Goldilocks problem, the thing that very rarely comes to mind when you think of the classic Goldilocks problem. We tend to think of, porridge and chairs that are too hard or too soft, or beds. We tend to think about the instrument of getting it right. But the thing that rarely comes to mind, and we encourage you to let this come to mind, is Goldilocks herself. Like, why is she even in the bear's cabin? What is she afraid of? What is she after? What does she need? We lose that in all of the thinking about what are the instruments. So with that, Kim Garrett, let's go to the next page and introduce. Now we have our minds primed, kind of trying to get you into a mindset of shifting your thinking to other people, shifting your thinking more to the people that this will be impacting. But we do want to give you some structure for how to walk through this. So so standing in this place of seeing change as a force that acts upon people, and that we need to be mindful of that. But we also need to manage, we need to do, we do have to have a process and a way of thinking that will move us through this. And as you look at this, we're going to unpack this a bit for you here, but as you look at this, I suspect that you should find this not terribly complex. It's not terribly complicated stuff moving through this process. But as we talk about this, I think you'll start to see that it's not so much about getting this process right. It's about the thinking and what you pay attention to at each one of these phases. That's what matters. It's how do you think about, what do you pay attention to, and then consequently, what you end up doing at each one of these phases that matters. So we think your secret sauce is much more in how you think about the problem than any, again, process, tool, or structure. With that said, though, we do want to talk through this and give you some of our insights for what you should be thinking about, what you should be noticing, what you should be paying attention to, the questions you should be asking at each one of these phases so that you can create, as the slide says, change that lasts in your organization. So I think, Courtney, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the first phases here.
Yep. So first and foremost, you needed to define what you're doing. So I talked about that pitfall of not having definition. It's a big deal. And I think I started the talk by saying, it took us a long time to realize what we've been doing. We went through these same steps, whether we were doing a performance management revamp. We had an organization say, hey, I want to up my leadership skills, to when I worked on mergers and acquisition, you bring a company, it's always the same thing. And the first things are always first. You have to get clear about what you're doing. What's changing, what's not. And you have to get clear that the define, align kind of go together, where at a leadership team, you have to have everyone on board with that. And so I'm just going to test you guys. Kim, you can go to the next kind of little prompt. I've worked with leaders for a long, long time where they have thought about a decision so much and it is so clear in their mind, and they've been over every scenario and every possibility. And it's just right here, so super clear. And I asked them, like, do people know what's changing? Do they understand it? And like, oh, yeah. Because they do. They've been thinking about nothing else. They don't sleep. They're sorting through, their brain's chewing on it. And the truth is, their organization, that leader's organization, that leadership team organization, they're focused on delivering customer stuff. They're processing a return. They're dealing with, how to get the next product out the door. And this change has not been absorbed. This change has not been heard. It certainly isn't understood. And it creates a really big gap when the people who are setting a direction for the organization believe everybody knows exactly what they know about what is coming. And we end up being really surprised, like, what do you mean that everyone isn't a mind reader and knows just exactly how this change is going to go? And so I challenge a lot of leaders I coach when I coach them through the change stuff of like, okay, if you're so convinced everyone knows what's going on, go ask 10 people. If you're a smaller organization, go ask 3 people. Ask them about Project Delta. Ask about whatever's going on with the new product. And be willing to be surprised. Because Jackie talked about proximity. It's hard to imagine that people don't know. You're like, well, I've sent them 10 emails and, whatever, I had a big communication thing. Like, if it doesn't impact them yet, they're not paying attention and they don't know. And so if they don't know what's expected, they're not taking actions, behaviors, and doing anything on a daily basis lines where you want them to go. So if you've made a decision and you think you've communicated, check and see if people know what you know. And then the alignment piece, the reason, like, it could be like, oh, align with leadership first and then make a decision. Yes, you need to do that. We deliberately put line behind define because of what happens after. There is nature that sort of kicks in once you've made a decision that forces people, either they get busy or they get new information or they had a different interpretation. And all of a sudden, like, if you've ever been in a kayak or a canoe, you know how sometimes you're like just sitting and mind your own business and you're floaty and you look up and you realize like you're a mile down the river and it didn't even feel like you were moving. The same thing happens with our business decisions. Like, it was super clear what we were doing when we talked about it in January. And now here we are looking, knocking on the door of March. And it seems like that group's doing something different than this group. We're not aligned anymore, or it doesn't feel like we are. And so it's work to keep the team together. There's also times where from the get-go, you've made a decision as a leadership team, and the business knows that some leader is not going to be in support of it. Or the team's in disagreement. Half the people were the seniors leader said we should do it, but half the people aren't supportive. Or we don't know, there's two different opinions on how we could go, and we're having trouble deciding. And all that is alignment work. We actually get brought into teams quite a bit to do like planning sessions, call them alignment sessions, call them strategic planning sessions. And the sole purpose of it is to make sure that we talk about what's working, what's not, where are we headed, and why. So that whole group, when our organization looks up to their leaders to decide if they're going to get in the boat and support this change, they see the same thing going on when they look up to the leadership team. And it's normal that we drift apart. It's normal because we're human beings. We have different experiences. We have different opinions. We have different visions that we don't all watch the same movies. We don't even enjoy the same TV shows. How are we going to superly, without having some discussion and some puts and takes, get to a place where we're on the exact same page about a decision that's going to impact the entire business? So sometimes we call it key leader coaching. Like we will just work with the leaders who aren't supportive and help them get their head wrapped around what they want. Sometimes we'll take an entire leadership team and say, hey, we know y'all don't agree. You haven't figured this out. Let's go through some discussions to get alignment. Because faster than anything, it's so funny because all change management assumes there's a business decision, and then we're just going to communicate it and train it and do all the skippity steps of change management. This stuff gets jacked up before you even get there because we haven't been clear about what's decided. Our leadership isn't aligned to it. And then we're out there. I just saw a marching band. We're all just, playing our own instrument, doing our own thing. And then we don't know why everyone in our organization is confused. We don't know why it's hard to get work done. We don't know why there's mistrust between groups. Of course, if there's not alignment at the top, you're forcing your teams to hash it out in the trenches. That's not fair, right? And if you're someone, most of you on this call, like I'm in the trench, my leaders aren't aligned, then what can you do about that? Who are you talking to? You can ask for clarity. You can ask for information. You can say like, hey, I'm getting two different answers here. What are you guys doing to fix that? We need clarity down here, right? That communication channel has to go both directions. I want to say like 10 more things, but I'm done. I'm gonna yank my own cord. There's one other thing. So I'm gonna talk about start small, right? And then I'm gonna give the thing back to Jackie. Start small. This is the eat the elephant thing. Every time we have done a large scale change that actually transformed the business, it stuck and worked. We took an approach of saying, where can we get this going? Where can we don't need everybody. You do not statistically, evidence-wise, you don't need everybody. If you can it doesn't even take 20% of people to start moving in the direction you want to go to start creating momentum. So start small. Who are your influencers? Who cares about this? Who wants a growth opportunity? Who's curious? Who are people following? And take those people, your small group, and invite them to go first. Invite them to lead. Invite them to make an impact. Train them, coach them, support the hell out of them. So that everywhere you look where people are resisting, you have evidence in that group that what they say can't happen, can, will, and is happening. Right? Use this group to create evidence. And when you pick your influencers, this is just like a tip. You have people on your teams. I bet some of the people on the call, you are these people. You're the go-to people. You know what a go-to people is? Right? You're the go-to. You're the person that's counted on, trusted. You lead. I've worked with organizations a lot where they say, my go-to people are tapped out because we go to the same people all the time because we do trust them to lead. We know they're going to make a difference. We know people are following them. My advice is go to different people. Spread the love because we believe our go-to people are great. Like the equation is, I have go-to people, they're great, and they're going to get things done. The reverse is actually true. When I go to people, I pick them, and I invite them to be a go-to person, they step up and perform, they learn and they grow. So if you expand your net, you go to different people, you go to more people, you will have more go-to people. The reverse is true, right? So who are your influencers? How do you starting small to create more influencers and then get going? And then Jackie will talk to you about how to expand the love, spread it around.
I always hesitate to talk about spreading things around in flu season, but
Okay, well,
here we are.
here we are.
This next step, and I know you're following along here, it starts with where are we going and are the people that are in charge of your organization, are they all together, right? And now we're going to start expanding out to the influencer group. But ultimately, you have to step off that dime as well and expand it into, just expand it larger across your organization. It is at this phase of change that weak alignment back at step 2 shows up. Because it gets real here. This is where it gets real. This is where a true investment in making this change real for your organization, to make this change lasting for your organization, is going to happen or not happen. This is the step that we can say change that lasts, is when you choose to expand and broaden the scope of the change. This is where we start to get dodgy. This is where people start to get a little bit dodgy. And you've been a part of what happens here when people get dodgy. All of a sudden, attention starts to sort of drift away to the next new thing. There's another, and this is where competing changes start to become more of a challenge for an organization. It's also where all of a sudden we really don't want to invest in what it's going to take to actually bring people along, and budgets start to also get distracted and push towards other things. This is an exceedingly important and really hard thing to do. We tend to want to, we've seen this happen, Courtney and I know we've lived through, a couple of projects recently where people want to move down, they get this, they see it, they understand the intelligence of it, and they want to stay safe though in that start small square and just hope that it will, somehow just make its way across the organization without any, further serious investment. And so they want to just keep feeding what we call vitamins to the influencer group, to the start small team. They want to just keep bringing us back sometimes and feeding vitamins to that group instead of actually getting brave and moving into doing the larger expansion across the organization, truly investing and sharing opportunities to learn and grow and become a part of the action with the larger organization. And this, by the way, it's not just, again, sending an email to all, right? This is not just an all employee message. This is genuinely investing in employees to become a part of the change in the same way, really, as your start small group, the go first group. They're just going first, not only just first. And this is the step where you have to expand it to everyone and bring them in. This is where we see the weak alignment. This is where we tend to lose commitment to the movement, because now it gets to be, well, downright expensive, I guess you could say. It's not cheap to invest in all of this, but this is where you really have to think about, are you trying to create change that lasts? Is this change worth it to your organization? And if it is, this is the time to invest and do the work. Then the next and final phase again.
Hey, Jack, can I add one thing that just popped to mind? The other thing, that you do the work and it's not sexy or new anymore, right? So there's something about an expand to committing to being a broken record, to being consistent, to still be like, I just see like a little xylophone and you're just hitting note C, ding, ding, yeah, we're still beating that thing. And the word discipline and consistency comes up, like the commitment to, you think about really, really companies that really do a good job branding, they've had the same brand forever. They're not sending you a new Nike logo every 2 minutes, right? So in the expansion, your message, you spread it, and then you just keep repeating yourself because it's important and it's foundational and it's not new, right? It's not a ribbon cutting. It's not, oh, look at, we're so good at, oh, something's new and look at all the stuff behind it. This is how we do it. And we talk about it all the time. And it's interwoven in our one-on-one discussions, and it's interwoven in our town halls, and it's in our like this is just what we do. And sometimes I think it takes a different kind of thinking to do messaging when it's in the expand phase. Because everyone was like, well, you already told me that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I'm gonna tell you again tomorrow. I'm gonna tell you the next day, and I'll tell you the next day. Like that, that's a different muscle to broaden and be consistent, and it's really, really valuable. But I think we give up because we want it to be. Um, I just keep thinking like sexier than it is. So I don't know if that triggers anything for you, Jackie, but
No, I think that's absolutely accurate. This is the slog,
slog.
right? It's the slog.
How do you spell that?
I don't know.
Damn it.
HARD. It's the slog. Um, the final phase is reinforce. And you all knew that was coming. You know that. This is talk about, so if we're already in the slog, now we're in a stage of doing the kind of work that will keep this stuff around, keep this change that lasts. And you can see that there's a really important word there in this phase, which is holding people accountable. So accountable is that's the game at this phase, is holding people accountable. And it turns out that accountability is incredibly fragile. It's hard to do. It's messy. And so we'll say a couple of things here, because at the end of the day, you can't hold someone accountable, even though, we talk about it all the time. You all know what it means to hold someone accountable. But when you really think about that, the all accountability eventually is self-accountability. Just like all motivation eventually is self-motivation. Is what you really do when you hold someone accountable is what you see there is you actually create an environment where people will be accountable. You can't make anyone do anything, but you can create an environment where it's more likely that people will do the things that you expect them to do. And that's the work that goes on here. And it's probably undervalued and misunderstood almost more than anything else on this chart, is creating a culture of accountability. So a couple of things that we teach around accountability, and it's kind of in the truth at the bottom of everything, which is, in order to get people to be accountable, you have to stop doing their job for them. I know that sounds like super obvious, but it's this thing that we call stepping back. And anyone who's ever been in a classroom with me has heard me talk about stepping back. Of how do you stop adding your 2 cents? Help is the sunny side of control. All of these things that you've probably heard us say before, if you've been listening to us for a while. This is this idea that, until we can, leaders, people who are trying to create and get a change to last and be a part of their organization, it's the more Yoda, less Superman idea. Another thing you've probably heard us say a lot. Stop doing people's work for them. Stop making excuses. Stop adding your 2 cents to everything. It's about getting the courage, the stomach, the constitution to be able to step back and let people actually own their work. We think accountability is a classic corporate weasel word, meaning a word that we use so often in corporate environments that it becomes completely drained of meaning. And then consequently, we end up just killing accountability all over the place because everyone is so afraid, essentially, to let go, to step back, to let people genuinely own their work, play around with these things, experience the tension of this might not work, because it probably won't all the time. and to believe in people. That's also really hard. We teach believing in others as a skill, believe it or not. We consider it a skill to believe in other people. These are all of the skills that need to kick in at this stage. For your leaders, this is the stuff they need to start noticing, paying attention to is, are they believing in others? Are they stepping back? Are they letting people experiment with things? Experiment with this might not work. Experiment with finding ways of being accountable, of exploring and innovating. This is an outcome-based idea. Like, we expect these standards. This is where we talk about standards and outcomes versus steps and obedience, right? Of just setting standards and letting people rise to those standards and care about what happens as a result of their work. There's a reason you introduced this change into the organization. There's a reason you invited people to be a part of this change, and now it's time to get out of the way and let those people care about their work and what happens as a result of working in this environment where this change is now a part of how we work. This is beyond just enforcing procedures, it's beyond just enforcing metrics. It is going beyond all of that into inviting people to care about what happens next and getting out of their way. Doesn't mean disconnecting, by the way. It doesn't mean like, this is what I expect and I'm out of here, like never to be seen again. This is also the time when leaders need to get really good at giving feedback. We do not have enough time on this call to talk about, I think we've done it in other webinars, and I'm sure we'll do it again, is how to get really good at giving people feedback without, sort of stealing back the responsibility, but just giving people really good and effective feedback so that it just now becomes a part of the environment, a part of what they do, a part of what they step up to and own. All of those things have got to be happening here. And when you know you're weak at that, when you know your organization isn't good at creating that culture of accountability, at giving really good feedback that actually changes performance and improves performance, you're going to want to think about that as you roll any change to the organization. You're probably going to want to also have sort of an underlying effort to improve leaders' ability to do those things.
Jack and I have talked about changing this graphic into more of a circle, because you can't hold people accountable for things you haven't set an expectation for. Mm-hmm. So early on in the define and alignment process, one of the questions we ask leaders is, how are you going to hold people accountable? What's going to look like when they're behaving? Like, what behaviors are going to be needed, and how are you going to respond as a leadership team when they are or aren't? And so it feeds into a definition and alignment step to set expectations. And if you haven't even, under thinking wise, you haven't even thought about what you need them to do, it's really hard to hold them accountable. It's really hard to create. If you need them to do certain things, part of that environment includes, do they have the tools and resources? Do they have the training? Do they have the information they need to do it? And as leaders, all those things play together. You can't just say, oh, well, they're not doing it. But we haven't really defined what it means. We haven't set expectations. We aren't in agreement about what's needed to get it done. And then we say to Slingshot about once a week, 10 times a week, oh, we have an accountability problem.
So there it all is. I hope that you can see, as Courtney and I talk about this, one of the challenges, it's not a challenge, what is it? Just one of the philosophies, I guess, that Courtney and I constantly have. I'd like to call it an argument, and I usually win, about what's the difference between managing change and just leading. We don't really know. We don't know. We don't know the difference between managing change and leading people. And we've settled on this idea that managing change is when something new that we can point to and say, this thing is coming through the organization, then it just requires different leadership behavior. You got to dial up a certain set of leadership behaviors when this is happening. And this is what you are seeing in these phases, is dialing up a specific kind of leadership while change is disrupting and moving through your organization. That's all this is. And so we hope that you're seeing that in as you move change through your organization, it's about thinking differently, noticing different things, being mindful of different things, being more aware of the impacts and how others are thinking. All of those things that are a normal part of leadership just become all that much more important as you're moving through change. And so there it all is. There's always a lot more to say about all of these things. And I think I'm gonna turn it back over to Courtney now to kind of take us to the next slide and tell you a little bit about, if we always have a lot more to say and a lot more to think about with you. So Courtney's going to tell you about how you can do that with us.
Yeah, and if you guys have questions about this, put them in the Q&A because we have a couple minutes to take questions today, which is awesome. That's not like us. We usually use every bit of airtime allotted to us. So yeah, take advantage of it if you have a question. So if you guys are, if this conversation is prompting some questions about either change, again, I love that Jack, you came back to, is it leadership or is it change? There's not a single leader that isn't responsible to create change in the organization. It is the same coin. It's the same thing. It's different sides of it. So there's different ways we can help you, right? We have straight up training programs. And for those of you that have been in our training or want to come to our training, like that's an easy entry point. For other people, maybe you're in a smaller organization, maybe your whole group's been through training, you haven't. We do change coaching. Like we can just talk to you about what's going on with your change and give you almost like business consultative conversations to think about in this change at last process. Some of you are like doing a whole bunch of stuff in the middle chevron, and you have some gaps on the front too, and then you've already thought about the training pieces. Now, I thought Jackie was going to say one of our challenges of talking about this is that we always put stuff in chevron boxes and it's never fit. It's not a process, right? It's not. It's sort of a roadmap, a little bit of guidance. This is what we see repeats, but you all are doing different pieces at the same time. It's a twisted rope for sure. So we can coach, we have conversations, training programs. I already talked about workshops, whether it's a leadership alignment workshop, a strategic planning workshop. Like if you know you want to implement a change and you want to sort of lay out what is the next 2 years, whatever, for us to go through the change at last steps on this initiative, we can help you do that because we've seen a lot of it and we kind of know things to think about. And then just general consulting. So each one of you are in very different places. And if it's helpful to talk to us, just shoot us an email because as Kim said at the beginning, we know that although it's all the same, you're all uniquely different. And a conversation is the best way to kind of figure out how we can help you. So just shoot us an email. Sometimes we respond to them. Sometimes we're at lunch. That's what I have. Nobody asked us a question? What?
No, we don't have any specific questions in the Q&A right now.
Okay. Well, that's what we have for you then. We'll wait and see if there's a question.
Yeah, we can just say thank you if there are, wait, did something come in?
Somebody anonymously was brave enough to ask a question. Should I read it?
Yes.
How can an individual contributor hold leaders accountable? They ask for the change, it's developed, and then they don't support it. I'm going to read the question. That's a hard one. See someone else. So this is my big sigh. How can individual contributors hold leaders accountable? Jackie, you got anything you want me to go or you want to add or?
Oh, sorry. I was still reading all the questions. How do you hold your leader accountable? Boy, of course, there are office politics, right? There is such a thing as hierarchies and be careful, right? So we don't like to issue career limiting advice. But generally speaking, the rules of coaching, of how to talk to someone about their performance apply either direction, up or down, generally speaking. But you also have to recognize that there is hierarchical issues and office politics surrounding all of these things. So with that caveat, I will say it's asking questions. It's mostly asking questions. So a general principle of coaching is to empathize with the other person, to think about this job isn't easy for them either. So number one, don't tell your selfish story that they are the big bad boss and they're a jerk and all these things. We all do it. I've done it. Sometimes you are, but maybe you are actually working for a jerk. I don't know. It happens. But the first thing is to just not lie to yourself about what's really going on for this person. And open up a conversation and ask, how are you feeling about this change? Like, what's hard about this change for you? To be empathetic and to ask questions about it. Yeah, I'm going to say that's probably my general answer there is you can coach up and you can coach down. But you also, I don't like to give career limiting advice. If there are office politics and hierarchical things that I'm not aware of, then I do say probably proceed with caution in some circumstances. But generally speaking, you can coach either way.
The only thing yes, and the thing I'd add is when it comes to change and when Jack just asks more questions, it's helpful to ask questions that invite the leader to see where they haven't been clear. So when you ask questions like, what's the scope of this? What's going to happen with that group? I have questions coming in about this. Like those, getting when you ask a question about a gap that hasn't been defined, they have no choice but to try to solve for that. And it comes off much better than saying, yeah, you people haven't thought through this, right? So just be specific. You need to know what's changing, when it's changing, how people are going to be told, how they're going to be held accountable. And so ask questions that give definition to the decision, because in asking, you are inviting that leader to go to another, to think a little bit deeper than that underthinking that Jackie described, and hopefully get some ahas about, oh, well, maybe this isn't thought through. Like I did a change impact assessment with a team one time that lasted about 4 minutes because they wanted me to do, say, an impact assessment. And I said, well, I asked one question, like who's going to do shipping or something. And it spun them in this whole conversation about, we haven't thought about that. I thought you were doing it. No, we thought we were doing it. And they're like, time out. We can't have an impact assessment discussion. We haven't even defined how this thing's going to work. So that is their accountability, like creating an environment where we know how it's going to work, or we thought through how we think it's going to work. That's a leader's job. The other thing about holding your leaders accountable is, I like what Jackie said, that goes up or down. So you have a right to ask for what your teams need from your leaders, and finding a way to do that, I think, is be smart about that. But absolutely, you can ask questions, you can ask for resources, you can point out gaps. They want to know, they want it to work, and you can keep that in mind to help bolster your courage, I think.
Yeah. There's a related question. I want to address the related question about more Yoda, less Superman. Like that resonates with people. I think people who are trying to be good leaders resonate with that. Those are the kind of people we tend to see in our classroom, are those who are after a better way to lead, a more effective, more humane way to lead. And we end up saying more Yoda, less Superman. Don't try to solve everything. That's not your job as a leader. But the natural pushback is that I try to exercise that as a people leader. And this was a former student, so I'm glad to see that. Thank you, Scott. But my leader wants more Superman. Any advice? Yeah, I bet they do. That's so tricky. I wish I had like a super whiz bang thing I could say here that you could take back to your boss, but I don't. And I think you'll appreciate that sometimes deciding to be a better leader comes with those sorts of short-term consequences of how do you, it still ends up being, what kind of leader do you want to be? We've done a talk before. I've done a talk many times about being the kind of leader that people will follow because they want to, not because they have to. And we know that in making those choices to be the kind of leader who is more likely to step back, to let people deal with the tension of this might not work, to be more Yoda-like than Superman-like, comes with some potentially personal consequences and difficult days. when your boss expects you to be the Superman for your team. Still, I'm going to still stick to the coaching up and coaching down works both ways. Have a conversation about that. Open your mind to what might be driving the fears for your boss that would be asking for that kind of behavior from you. Be open to listening to that, asking questions. Yeah, just open a dialogue around that. And that takes courage, and it also takes understanding your environment.
I want to take Justine's question. Hi, Justine, and then we'll let you guys go. Best advice I ever got when it comes to change. I think the best advice I ever got is there's no cure for assumptions. And it goes into humility, it goes into empathy, it goes into curiosity, all the things we teach as leadership skills. Like everyone, because they have experience and they've done it before, they go into everything with assumptions. And when it comes to change, there's not cures for that. We have to back up, get curious, unpack things, and get to what movie's playing in your head, what movie's playing in mine, and get alignment. I give more advice than I get these days because of my age. And the advice I give the most is care more. Care more. If you go into change, if you want it to stick, if you care about people, you care about the outcome, you be a human being, you are civil and kind and want the right things to happen, you be a good person, you're going to be a good leader. We say all the time, and I'll leave you with this, change is going to get you into a mess. It's hard for people. Leadership will get you out. Leaders care. And if we care enough to understand what our changes are going to mean to people, we're going to set ourselves up for success. So I think that's where we'll leave them today.